Chapter 8. Eve had no problem listing several connections between Cicely Towers and Yvonne Metcalf. Number 1 was murder. The method and the perpetrator. They had both been women in the public eye, well respected, and held in great affection. They were successful in their chosen fields and were dedicated to that field. They both had families who loved and who mourned, yet they had worked and played in dramatically different social and professional circles. Yvonne's friends had been artists, actors, and musicians, while Cicely had socialized with law enforcers, business people, and politicians. Cicely had been an organized career woman of impeccable taste who had guarded her privacy fiercely. Yvonne had been a cheerfully disorganized, borderline messy actor who courted the public eye. But someone had known them both well enough and felt strongly enough about both to kill them. The only name Eve found in Cicely's tidy address book and Yvonne's disordered one that matched was Rourke. For the third time in an hour, Eve ran the lists through her computer, pushing for a connection. A name that clicked with another name, an address, a profession, a personal interest. The few connections that came through were so loosely linked she could barely justify taking the next step toward the interview. But she would do it, because the alternative was Rourke. While the computer handled the short list, she took another pass through Yvonne's electronic diary. Why the hell didn't the woman put in names? Eve muttered. There were times, dates, occasionally initials, often little side notes or symbols of Yvonne's mood. 1 o'clock lunch at the Crown Room with BCEP. Don't be late, Yvonne, and wear the green number with the short skirt. He likes prompt women with legs. Beauty day at Paradise. Thank God. 10 o'clock. Should try to hit Fitness Palace at 8 for workout. Fancy lunches, Eve mused. Pampering in the top salon in the city. Sweating a little in a luxury gym. Not a bad life. All in all, who had wanted to end it? She flipped through to the day of the murder. 8 o'clock. A power breakfast. A little blue suit with matching shoes. Look professional for Christ's sake, Yvonne. 11 o'clock. P.A.'s office to discuss contract negotiations. Maybe sneak in some shopping first. Shoe sale at Saks. Hot damn. Lunch. Skip dessert. Maybe. Tell Cutie he was wonderful and show no penalty for lying to pals about their acting. God, wasn't he awful? Call home. Hit Saks if you missed it earlier. 5-ish. Drinks. Stick with spring water, babe. You talk too much when you're loose. Be bright, sparkle. Push tune in. $. Don't forget photo layout in morning and stay away from that wine. Go home, take a nap. Midnight meeting. Could be hot stuff. Wear the red and white striped number, and smile, smile, smile. Bygones are bygones, right? Never close that door. Small world, and so on. What a dumbass. So she documented the meeting at midnight. Not who, not where, not what, but she'd wanted to be well dressed for it. Someone she'd known, had a history with. Bygones, a past problem with lover, Eve mused. She didn't think so. Yvonne hadn't put little hearts around the notation or told herself to be sexy. Sexy, sexy. Eve thought she was beginning to understand the woman. Yvonne had been amused at herself, ready for fun, enjoying her lifestyle, and she'd been ambitious. Wouldn't she have told herself to smile, 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 for a career opportunity, a part, good press, a new script, an influential fan? What would she have said about Rourke? Eve wondered. Most likely she'd have noted him down with a big, bold-faced capital R. She would have put hearts around the date, or $signs, or smiles, as she had 18 months before she died. Eve didn't have to look at Yvonne's previous diaries. She remembered perfectly the woman's last notation on Rourke. Dinner with R.A. 8:30. Yum yum. Wear the white satin matching teddy. Be prepared. Might get lucky. The man's body is awesome. I wish I could figure out his head. Oh well. Just think sexy and see what happens. Eve didn't particularly want to know if Yvonne had gotten lucky. Obviously, they'd been lovers. Rourke had said so himself, so why hadn't she put down any more dates with him after the white satin? It was something, she supposed, she'd have to find out for investigative purposes only. Meanwhile, she would make another trip to Yvonne's apartment, and try again to reconstruct the last day of her life. She had interviews to schedule, and, as Yvonne's parents called her at least once a day, Eve knew she would have to talk with them again. steel herself against their horrible grief and disbelief. She didn't mind the 14 and 16-hour days. In fact, at this stage of her life, she welcomed them. 4 days after Van Metcalf's murder, Eve was running on empty. She had questioned over 36 people extensively, exhaustively. Not only had she been unable to discover a single viable motive, she'd found no one who hadn't adored the victim. There wasn't a hint of an obsessed fan. Yvonne's mail had been mountainous, and Feeney and his computer were still scanning the correspondence. But among the first section, there had been no threats, veiled or overt. No word or unsavory offers or suggestions. There had been a hefty percentage of marriage proposals and other propositions. Eve culled them out with little hope or enthusiasm. There was still a chance that someone who had written to Yvonne had written or contacted Cicely. As time passed, the chance became a long shot. Eve did what was expected in unsolved multiple homicides. What departmental procedure called for at this stage of an investigation. She made an appointment with the shrink. While she waited, Eve struggled with her mixed feelings for Dr. Myra. The woman was brilliant, insightful, quietly efficient, and compassionate. Those were the precise reasons Eve dragged her feet. She had to remind herself again that she hadn't come to Myra for personal reasons or because the department was sending her for therapy. She wasn't going through testing. They weren't going to discuss her thoughts, her feelings or her memory. They were going to dissect the mind of a killer. Still, she had to concentrate on keeping her heart rate level, her hands still and dry. When she was gestured into Myra's office, Eve told herself her legs were shaky because she was tired, nothing more. Lieutenant Dallas, Myra's pale blue eyes skimmed over Eve's face, noted the fatigue. "I'm sorry you had to wait." "No problem." Though she would have preferred standing, Eve took the blue scoop chair beside Myra. "I appreciate you getting to the case so quickly." "We all do our jobs as best we can," Myra said in her soothing voice. "And I had a great deal of respect and affection for Cicely Towers." "You knew her?" "We were contemporaries, and she consulted me on many cases. I often testified for the prosecution as well as the defense," she added, smiling a little. "But you knew that." "Just making conversation." "I also admired Yvonne Metcalf's talent. She brought a lot of happiness to the world." "She'll be missed." "Someone isn't going to miss either of them." "True enough." In her smooth, graceful way, Myra programmed her auto chef for tea. "I realize you might be a bit pressed for time, but I work better with a little stimulation. And you look as though you could use some." "I'm fine." Recognizing the tightly controlled hostility in the tone, Myra only lifted a brow. "Overworked, as usual." "It happens to those who are particularly good at their jobs." She handed Eve a cup of tea in one of the pretty china cups. "Now, I've read over your reports, the evidence you've gathered, and your theories." "My psychiatric profile," she said, tapping a sealed disc on the table between them. "You've completed it." Eve didn't trouble to mask the irritation. "You could have transmitted the data and saved me a trip." "I could have, but I preferred to discuss this with you, face to face." "Eve, you're dealing with someone, very dangerous." "I think I picked up on that, Doctor." "2 women have had their throats slashed." "2 women, thus far," Myra said quietly and sat back. "I'm very much afraid there will be more. And soon." Because she believed the same, Eve ignored the quick chill that sprinted up her spine. Why? It was so easy, you see. And so simple. A job well done. There's a satisfaction in that. There's also the attention factor. Whoever accomplished the murders can now sit back in his or her home and watch the show. The reports, the editorials, the grieving, the services, the public arena of the investigation. She paused to savor her tea. "You have your theory, Eve. You're here so that I can corroborate it or argue against it." "I have several theories." "Only one you believe in?" Myra smiled her wise smile, aware that it made Eve bristle. "Fame." What else did those 2 women have in common but their public prominence? They didn't share the same social circle or professional one, knew few of the same people, even on a casual level. They didn't patronize the same shops, health centers, or cosmetic experts. What they did share was fame, public interest, and a kind of power, which the killer envied. I would say exactly that. Resented as well and wished, by killing them, to bask in the reflected attention. The murders themselves were both vicious and uncommonly clean. Their faces weren't marred, nor were their bodies. One quick slice across the throat, according to the me, from the front, face to face. A blade is a personal weapon, an extension of the hand. It isn't distant like a laser or aloof like poison. Your murderer wanted the feel of killing, the sight of blood, the smell of it, the full experience that makes him or her one who appreciates having control, following through on a plan. You don't believe it was a hard hit. There's always that possibility, Eve, but I'm more inclined to see the killer as an active participant rather than a hireling. Then there are the souvenirs. Towers' umbrella, and Metcalf's right shoe. You've managed to keep that out of the press. Barely. Eve scowled over the memory of Morse and his crew invading the murder scene. A pro wouldn't have taken a souvenir, and the killings were too well thought out to have been planned by a street hit. I agree. You have an organized mind, an ambitious one. Your murderer is enjoying his work, which is why there'll be another, or hers. Eve put in. The envy factor can be leaned toward a female. These two women were what she wanted to be: beautiful, successful, admired, famous, strong. It's often the weak who kill. Yes, quite often. No, it isn't possible to determine gender from the data we have at this point, only to access the probability factor that the killer targets females who have reached a high level of public attention. What am I supposed to do about that, Dr. Myra? Put a security beeper on every prominent, well-known, or successful woman in the city, including yourself. Odd. I was thinking more about you. Me? Eve jiggled the tea she hadn't touched, then set it on the table with a snap. That's ridiculous. I don't think so. You've become a familiar face, Eve, for your work, certainly, and most particularly since the case last winter. You're very respected in your field. And, she continued before Eve could interrupt, you also have one more important connection to both victims. All of you have had a relationship with Rourke. Eve knew her blood drained from her face. That wasn't something she could control, but she could keep her voice level and hard. Rourke had a business partnership, a relatively minor one, with Towers. With Metcalf, the intimate side of their relationship has been over for quite some time. Yet you feel the need to defend him to me. I'm not defending him, Eve snapped. I'm stating facts. Rourke's more than capable of defending himself. Undoubtedly, he's a strong, vital, and clever man. Still, you worry for him. In your professional opinion, is Rourke the killer? Absolutely not. I have no doubt that were I to analyze him, I would find his killer instinct well developed. The fact was, Meyer would have loved the opportunity to study Rourke's mind, but his motive would have to be very defined. Great love or great hate. I doubt there is much else that would push him over the line. Relax, Eve, Myra said quietly. You're not in love with the murderer. I'm not in love with anyone, and my personal feelings aren't at issue here. On the contrary, the investigator's state of mind is always an issue. And, if I'm required to give my opinion on yours, I'll have to say I found you near exhaustion, emotionally torn, and deeply troubled. Eve picked up the profile disc and rose. Then it's fortunate you're not going to be required to give your opinion. I'm perfectly capable of doing my job. I don't doubt it for a moment. But at what cost to yourself? The cost would be higher if I didn't do it. I'm going to find who killed these women. Then it'll be up to someone like Cicely Towers to put them away. Eve tucked the disc in her bag. There's a connection you left out, Dr. Myra. Something these two women had in common. Eve's eyes were hard and cold. Family. Both of them had close family that was a large and important part of their lives. I'd say that lets me out as a possible target, wouldn't you? Perhaps. Have you been thinking of your family, Eve? Don't play with me. You mentioned it, Myra pointed out. You're always careful in what you say to me, so I must assume family is on your mind. I don't have family, Eve shot back, and I've got murder on my mind. If you want to report to the commander that I'm unfit for duty, that's just fine. When are you going to trust me? There was impatience, for the first time in Eve's memory, in the careful voice. Is it so impossible for you to believe that I care about you? Yes, I care, Myra said when Eve blinked in surprise. And I understand you better than you wish to admit. I don't need for you to understand me. But there were nerves in Eve's voice now. She heard them herself. I'm not in testing or here for a therapy session. There are no recorders on here. Myra set her tea down with the snap that had Eve jamming her hands in her pockets. Do you think you're the only child who lived with horror and abuse? The only woman who struggled to overcome it? I don't have to overcome anything. I don't remember Ray. My stepfather raped me repeatedly from the time I was 12 until I was 15. Myra said calmly, and stopped Eve's protest cold. For those 3 years I lived never knowing when it would happen, only that it would, and no one would listen to me. Shaken, sick, Eve wrapped her arms around her body. I don't want to know this. Why are you telling me this? Because I look in your eyes and see myself. But you have someone who will listen to you, Eve. Eve stood where she was, moistened her dry lips. Why did it stop? Because I finally found the courage to go to an abuse center, tell the counselor everything, to submit to the examinations, both physical and psychiatric. The terror of that, the humiliation of that, was no longer as huge as the alternative. Why should I have to remember it? Eve demanded. It's over. Why aren't you sleeping? The investigation, Eve. The gentle tone had Eve closing her eyes. It was so hard, so trying, to fight that quiet compassion. Flashbacks, she murmured, hating herself for the weakness. Nightmares of before you were found in Texas? Just blips. Just pieces. I can help you put them together. Why should I want to put them together? Haven't you already started to? Now Myra rose. You can work with this haunting your subconscious. I've watched you do so for years. What happiness eludes you, and will continue to do so until you've convinced yourself you deserve it. It wasn't my fault. Myra touched a gentle hand to Eve's arm. No, it wasn't your fault. Tears were threatening. And that was a shock and an embarrassment. I can't talk about this, my dear. You've already begun to. I'll be here when you're ready to do so again. She waited until Eve had reached the door. Can I ask you a question? You always ask questions. Why stop now? Myra said and smiled. Does Rourke make you happy? Sometimes. Eve squeezed her eyes shut and swore. Yes. He makes me happy. Unless he's making me miserable. That's lovely. I'm very pleased for both of you. Try to get some sleep. Eve, if you won't take chemicals, you might use simple visualization. I'll keep it in mind. Eve opened the door, kept her back to the room. Thank you. You're welcome. Visualization wouldn't be much help, Eve decided. Not after a rescan of autopsy reports. The apartment was too quiet. Too empty. She was sorry she'd left the cat with Rourke. At least Galahad would have been company. Because her eyes burned from studying data, she pushed away from her desk. She didn't have the energy to seek out Mavis and was bored senseless with the video offerings on her screen. She ordered music, listened for 30 seconds, then switched it off. Food usually worked, but when she poked into the kitchen, she was reminded she hadn't restocked her auto chef in weeks. The pickings were slim, and she didn't have enough of an appetite to order in. Determined to relax, she tried out the virtual reality goggles Mavis had given her for Christmas. Because Mavis had used them last, they were set for nightclub, at full volume. After a hurried adjustment and a great deal of swearing, Eve programmed Tropics Beach. She could feel the grit of hot, white sand under her bare feet, the punch of the sun on her skin, the soft, ocean breeze. It was lovely to stand in the gentle surf, watch the swoop of gulls, and sip from an icy drink that carried a zing of rum and fruit. There were hands on her bare shoulders, rubbing. Sighing, she leaned back into them, felt the firm length of mail against her back. Far out on the blue sea a white ship sailed toward the horizon. It was easy to turn into the arms that waited for her, to lift her mouth to the mouth she wanted, and to lie on the hot sand with a body that fit so perfectly with hers. The excitement was as sweet as the peace, the rhythm as old as the waves that lapped over her skin. She let herself be taken, shivered as the needs built toward fulfillment. His breath was on her face. His body linked with her when she groaned out his name. Rourke, furious with herself, Eve tore off the goggles and heaved them aside. He had no right to intrude, even here, inside her head. No right to bring her pain and pleasure when all she wanted was privacy. Oh, he knew what he was doing. she thought as she sprang up the pace. He knew exactly what he was doing, and they were going to settle it, once and for all. She slammed the apartment door behind her. It didn't occur to her until she was speeding through his gates that he might not be alone. The idea of that was so infuriating, so devastating, that she took the stone steps 2 at a time, hit the door with a fresh burst of violent energy. Somerset was waiting for her. "Lieutenant, it's 1:20 in the morning." "I know what time it is." She bared her teeth when he stepped in front of her to block the staircase. "Let's understand each other, pal. I hate you. You hate me. The difference is I've got a badge. Now get the hell out of my way or I'll haul your bony ass in for obstructing an officer." Dignity coated him like silk. "Do I take that to mean you're here, at this hour, in an official capacity?" "Lieutenant, take it any way you want." "Where is he?" "If you'll state your business, I'll be happy to determine Rourke's current whereabouts and see if he's available to you." Out of patience, Eve jammed an elbow in his gut and skirted his wheezing form. "I'll find him myself," she stated as she bounded up the stairs. He wasn't in bed, alone or otherwise. She wasn't entirely sure how she felt about that, or what she would have done if she'd found him twined around some blonde. Refusing to think about it, she turned on her heel and marched away toward his office, with Somerset hot on her trail. "I intend to file a complaint." "File away," she shot back over her shoulder. "You have no right to intrude on private property, in the middle of the night." "You will not disturb Rourke." He slapped a hand on the door as she reached it. "I will not allow it." To Eve's surprise, he was out of breath and red-faced. His eyes were all but jittering in their sockets. It was, she decided, more emotion than she'd believed him capable of. "This really puts your jocks in a twist, doesn't it?" Before he could prevent it, she hit the mechanism and the door slid open. He made a grab for her, and Rourke, who turned from his study of the city, had the curious surprise of watching them grapple. "Put a hand on me again, you tight-assed son of a bitch, and I'll deck you." She lifted a fist to demonstrate. "The satisfaction would be worth my badge." "Somerset," Rourke said mildly. "I believe she means it." "Leave us alone." She's exceeded her authority. "Leave us alone," Rourke repeated. "I'll deal with this." "As you wish." Somerset jerked his starched jacket back into place and strode out, with only the slightest of limbs. "If you want to keep me out," Eve snapped on her march toward the desk, "you're going to have to do better than that flat-assed guard dog." Rourke merely folded his hands on the desktop. "If I'd wanted to keep you out, you would no longer be cleared through gate security." Deliberately, he flicked a glance at his watch. "It's a bit late for official interviews. I'm tired of people telling me what time it is." "Well then," he leaned back in the chair. "What can I do for you?"